Ladies and gentlemen, lovely to see you all again. Oh my goodness, one more talk after this one. So that's a bit sad, isn't it? Even though we're going to some great places. I was just having a chat with Dan, actually. I always have about 2 or 3 minutes before I come through that little gap and have a chat with him. I learned so much about stage management, and I was talking to him about those cold sparks that came down last night from the rock show. They're not fireworks, but you know, you can put your hand over them. They look really, really impressive. So, what do we got today? Looking after our ocean. Let's have a look. I wanted to talk to you today about some environmental things that are important, I think, in terms of what we've got, preserving what we've got. I think the talk said, "Can our oceans survive us?" Well, it's exactly the same talk, so I haven't changed anything. It's just the title, a bit of confusion over the title. There we have it, cars, ships, better keep quiet about that one, aeroplanes, and a gasping earth choking away. Let's first do a recap on some of the stuff. Let's have a look at what we've got and what it is we should really preserve. Might help if I turn this thing on. There we go. The ocean. This is what we got. 71% of the surface area of the surface area of this planet is water. And it's an enormous amount of ocean, very, very sort of in terms of the volume. I think we've got something like 1.33 billion cubic kilometers of ocean, and that is approximately 97% of all the water on Earth. The rest of it is locked up in the Antarctic and the Arctic and the glaciers and the other river systems on the planet. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is just a bit of a recap. 99% of the biomass is contained within the ocean. The weight of all the creatures and the animals and the plants and the phyto, the zooplankton, etc. And we've got 300 times the habitable terrestrial volume. So if you take the amount of space that's available on Earth, I guess you can't really exist much higher than about 22,000 feet for certain animals in the Himalayas. And of course, you've got sea level. So tremendous amount of volume for these creatures to exist in. So, again, just passing through, we know the Mariana Trench. We talked about the Mariana Trench and the Challenger Deep a couple of talks ago about the guys who went down there. That's his position. There's lots of other places on the planet. They're not quite as deep. They're not 36,000 feet, but they're 20,000 feet. They're 25,000 feet. In fact, we're passing near to one not too far away from the Puerto Rico Trench, which is about 25,000 feet, so that's quite deep. So Mariana Trench, those guys went down in January of 1960, and there we are, Mariana Trench, 36,000 feet. Again, we'll sort of pass through that one quite quickly. You can put Mount Everest in it, etc. We talked about this in detail last time. These two chaps, Don Walsh and Pickard, they were the first to go down in the Trieste. Trieste was the vessel filled with the petrol, and of course they were in the little bathyscaphe, the bathysphere, which is probably no bigger than sort of, if you went 7 feet in one of these discs on the stage, a very, very small confined space. So they went down, they were the first, and this guy went down 50 years later, James Cameron, the film director of the Titanic, in his own sort of specially designed craft. Very different technology. He was much, much safer in terms of the parameters of stress on the vessel, and the others literally were taking a massive, massive big adventure. At least when he went down, they knew what they were facing by going down to 36,000 feet. You can imagine the pressure down there. Well, it is 1,086 times that of atmospheric pressure here on the surface. So can cause a lot of problems. So we've seen him. 12 men have visited this place. That's the moon. In fact, I must admit, I've been very much enjoying Ken's lectures at 10 o'clock in the morning, where he's been sort of talking about the space race, the Russians and the Americans. And it was a really incredible story about how over the course of about a decade, they went from not knowing anything in terms of how to get sort of rockets up there to actually putting men on the surface of the moon, 250,000 miles away. So really quite exceptional thing. And again, as I said in the last talk, 12 men visited the moon. Maybe it's approaching that in terms of the number of people who've been down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It's because I've certainly read certain things on with journalists who've been down, lucky journalists who writing for National Geographic who've been down there. So it might be more than 12, but I suspect it's less. So it's still a very, very remote and unexplored place. So you see down the bottom, you see cusk eel, that they've seen those, and you can get those down at 34,000 feet. A white albino eel that has never seen light in any shape or form whatsoever, bar lights that come from submersibles, and perhaps some light that's given off by other animals that the chromatophores are giving off very small amounts of light. You do get light-producing organs and creatures down there, as we sort of covered in the last talk. So what have we got? And you've got plants down there as well. Right at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, you get these things here as xenophytophores. They are just strange plant-like material, but they don't use photosynthesis because they're the light is 7 miles above them. So sort of it's a mixture of, they develop their bodies by taking in nutrients and taking in sort of strange sort of particles of iron and manganese and things like that to develop their bodies, etc., and to grow. So lots of strange stuff in the ocean. What have we got? Puerto Rico Trench, as I said. So I reckon from where we are, we're kind of, you go to the H on Trench and you go across about a foot. That's our position. We're about the same latitude now as southern Cuba, about 21 degrees north. So not too far, 8,800 meters. That's pretty deep. So Calypso Deep, if you want to go to the Mediterranean, we've got 17,000 feet just to the south of Corfu and places like that. So that's a very, very deep place in the Mediterranean. One more, have I got one more? How much life? Again, just a summary. 99% of all life on Earth. I think the figure is 99.7% actually, so it's 0.3% is the amount of estimated life in terms of the total biomass that exists on the land. So it's truly amazing, and we still have so much work to do in terms of understanding it and developing our knowledge as to what's down there. So we've got to be aware of the problems that we as human beings are creating for the oceans. Let's see what we got. Okay, come on, less than 1% we've done it. I thought you'd like a picture of an elephant crossing the road. What have we got? Let me talk about the food chain. So let's start with the food chain because that's very important. Obviously, we, as human beings, we like our food. And our food comes from nature. There's no two ways about it. We discussed the other day the phytoplankton and the importance of the phytoplankton. That is the primary production on this planet. The sun's energy, without the sun, we'd be in trouble. So the sun's energy produces... we've got a situation, photosynthesis, which came about 3 billion years ago. We have 6 molecules of water, 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, so that's carbon dioxide coming in, produces one complex model, one complex sugar, and 6 molecules of oxygen. So there's this great balance, carbon dioxide sucked in and oxygen given out. So not only is it replenishing the oxygen in the atmosphere, but it's producing a whole array of sugars and glycols and amino acids and little eggs and nutrients and oils just floating there on the surface of the ocean. In fact, the whole of the ocean right the way through, the top half a millimeter is just this oily substance, and that's what gives the ocean that strange shimmer. It's the sort of layer of eggs and fat and glycols and oils just floating on the surface. Tremendous, tremendous nutrients everywhere covering the whole of the oceans around the world. So what feeds on those? We've got the zooplankton, the little tiny sort of larvae and the crustaceans that feed on that, and we've got the big whales that come in to feed on the zooplankton. And right the way up the chain, so the stuff we're interested in, up on deck 12, etc., it's the lobster and the prawns and the various other stuff that we like and the fish. Without the bottom layer, you don't get the stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. And of course, right at the top, we don't go eating porpoises, we don't go eating orca, we don't go eating whales anymore, thank goodness. But those are the chaps right at the top of the apex, right at the top of the chain. And if this collapses, this were to fall to bits, not only would they go out of business and not have any food, but we certainly, because we're interested in level sort of 4 and 3, which is our sort of basic consumption of fish, we'd be in trouble as well. And it could happen very, very fast because we've got a situation whereby we are acidifying the ocean. We're acidifying because we've got carbon dioxide coming in, and what happens is the carbon dioxide is mixing with the water, and it's forming carbonic acid, which is a weak acid, but it's still an acid. And so we're going away from an alkali situation, and at the moment, if you take neutrality as being pH 7 down the line, to one side we are about 8.14 at the moment, and we're moving it towards neutral. So we're not going to take it to a really nasty acidic situation at the moment. That would be really catastrophic, but we're just nudging it away from alkaline and making it slightly more acidic. You remember I talked to you about the extinction event, the PT extinction 252 million years ago. Well, that was catastrophic. The oceans there would have been mildly acidic. They would probably come in at about 6.7 or 6.6, I mean, just like vinegar. So that was extreme. Luckily, we're not heading in that direction, but we've got to be careful because we're stopping these creatures from producing, and they're all very, very pretty and beautiful, and many of them have calcium carbonate shells. Look at those guys, coccolithophores. Look at the intricacy of that design. Well, that's calcium carbonate. That's chalk, effectively. Chalk structured in a way that enables these animals to have, that's their outer exoskeletons. And of course, these are the guys that are producing the oxygen. They're converting the carbon dioxide into sugar, and we've got oxygen that's coming out as well. So we don't want these chaps to dissolve. So as we take, with the carbon dioxide going in, we're removing the carbonate from the water. And when the carbonate's removed from the water, if you've got something like this, a coccolithophore, which has got this shell it's constructed, because there's less carbonate in the water, effectively, they just dissolve. They dissolve away. So scientists are very, very worried about this. Let's not sort of put any sort of any softeners on this. This is something that really is of great concern to science, that we could be 30 or 40 years off, even the rate of which we're acidifying the oceans, destroying that base level of our phytoplankton and the ability to have these creatures create and produce oxygen and food. So, look at them. They are very, very pretty. They look like sort of they've been manufactured in a factory. What have we got? So the coccolithophores, and we got the zooplankton feeding off that. And you can see these blooms. That's sort of phytoplankton bloom just off the Cornish coast, obviously in parts of Devon. The vast amount of phytoplankton, as we discussed the other day when we talked about the whales, the great big sort of the humpback whales and the blue whale, etc., going down to feed in the southern part of the ocean. So we've got the big phytoplankton blooms down there. Massive, massive sort of areas of nutrient. And on top of the phytoplankton, that's the phytoplankton that's showing up, you've got the zooplankton, which are the little animals. There was that little creature called Euphausia superba, which is what the blue whale is after. That's what it loves, and it's about half a centimeter to a centimeter in length, weighs about 2 grams, and that is basically blue whale food. So trillions of tons, billions of tons of that stuff down there in the Southern Ocean. Okay, so we need to preserve it. What have we got? Next slide. Let me talk to you about the rainforest, because if I say to you that the phytoplankton produces about 50% of our oxygen, that's the annual production, about 50% of all the oxygen produced by photosynthesis. And another fact about photosynthesis, so I can get it in context, the energy that photosynthesis develops in terms of utilizes on an annual basis in terms of converting the sun's energy is about 130 terawatts. That's 130 trillion watts. That's the energy. All of the energy used by humans in all of the cities, all of the cruise ships, all of the aeroplanes, all of everything, Mumbai, Jakarta, New York, all the lights, keeping the lights on an annual basis, is about 35 terawatts. So photosynthesis is about 4 times the amount of energy that us humans use in terms of just maintaining the lights on the planet. So it's truly a significant amount of energy that comes from nature. So we obviously don't want that to stop. So 50% of our oxygen, coming back to the phytoplankton, comes from their activities. The tropical rainforests produce the rest of it, about the rest of it, yeah. And in particular, the great basin of the Amazon is where a lot of the activity takes place, converting carbon dioxide into this wonderful stuff, oxygen. So we've got a big problem at the moment, obviously, with our sort of tropical rainforests. You can see there we've got the Amazon, we've got the Congo Basin, we've got the Daintree forest in northern Australia, and some of the other forests through Sumatra and Borneo, and extending into the northern parts of sectors of Australia. I think that actually some of that is not so much, it's not totally the truly tropical rainforest. There's some other wet forests as well, because you've got some of those going up into Mexico. But that's basically the structure of the forests tropical forests on Earth. So we have to preserve them, because as we cut them down, one fact, which is quite alarming, the Amazon was more or less intact in 1970. If you take a 1970 sort of PHILLIP atlas and you open it up and you get your map of the Amazon, that is about how the Amazon has been for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, before humans started to get into the interior of it and start chopping it up. You can see here on this map, even on this map, we've got little patches in the middle. Since 1970, we've lost about 940,000 square miles of pure virgin Amazonian jungle, just to take the Amazon as the prime example. That is 10 times the surface area of the United Kingdom, which is 94,000 square miles. So we've lost 10 Britons in terms of the amount of forest deforestation that's taken place. Some scientists say we've deforested the Amazon by 17%. Others say, no, it's really much higher than that. It's more like 21% or 22%. But what they're all agreed on is that at 25%, if you take away 1/4 of the Amazon, as it is from central part of Venezuela right the way down to sort of Bolivia and northern parts of Paraguay, at that point, that's where the Amazon will go into a sort of permanent degradation. And every year, you're going to get more and more fires, you're going to get more and more diebacks, and you're going to get less and less vegetation produced. So the Amazon will start to turn from a tropical rainforest into something like a savanna. And there's even more apocalyptic sort of theories and suggestions but based on models that, 50 years down the line, vast amounts of the central part of Brazil will be as dry as certain parts of the Sahara. Now, this is all very, very sort of frightening stuff in terms of ecology. I know we've moved off the ocean a bit, but I just thought I'd bring this in because I think it's important. And the same thing is happening in Central Africa, and the same thing is happening sort of in places like Borneo. If I were to show you a map of Borneo from 1960 with total, utter coverage of forest to what it is now, where it's only about 15%, you'd find it truly shocking. But we'll save that for another day. So those are our tropical rainforests. They are very, very important to us. And like everything on this planet, we upset the balance of one thing, and it has an effect on something else, which has an effect on something else. It's called feedback. And one little feedback loop affects another loop, and the loops get bigger, and in unison together, they all add up to some sort of almighty mess if we let it get out of control. So, crucial biological relationships. I think I've done this. So that's one of our whales. That's a humpback whale. You can tell by the giant, great big flippers. Always covered in barnacles, humpback whales. And we've got at the top, effectively krill, which is what these guys like to eat. So they don't go for the middle stuff, they go for the bottom stuff. They go for the zooplankton. Ocean pollution. We don't want to see that. So let's start with the stuff we don't like. The good thing is that I've seen people, even down on my local beach, get involved with clearing up bottles and plastic, and you get the sort of people on Sunday morning spend hours and hours just tidying up the beaches, which is a good thing. That's obviously an extreme example, but many, many years ago, you used to see beaches like that, and I find these days that people have gone about looking to clean things up. And it was interesting enough, because there was a chap I met earlier. I didn't catch your name, but if you're in here today, it was a good chat we had yesterday. We were talking about the blue-ringed octopus, and he said, on the beaches, when people are cleaning up the bottles, they have to check that blue-ringed octopus, the most deadly octopus on the planet, haven't crawled into some of the bottles, because you don't want to be walking around with a bottle with a blue-ringed octopus sitting in it. You don't actually need the thing to envenomate you. You can just sort of touch the water that the blue-ringed octopus has been in for the tetrodotoxin to seep into your skin, because our skin is very capable of absorbing stuff from the outside. Ocean pollution. So we don't like this. This is no good, but I think humanity's getting a grip on this, and we're beginning to sort of clear it up. Oil spills. Right. We are totally dependent on hydrocarbons, as you know. That doesn't seem to be going away. We've just had COP29. Everyone said, oh, what a disaster that was, even though there seems to be some sort of recovery at the end. But the oil business, hydrocarbons, the countries that produce oil seem to be producing more and more and more. And as a society, a global society, we are totally and utterly dependent on it. It's just not going to go away for the time being. Okay, we're moving towards electric cars, electric vehicles, etc. But it's a slow move, so we're dependent on this stuff. Problems we've got these days is not just, birds get covered in it and they can't fly and they have to be sort of washed with special detergent, but that doesn't do them any favors. And you tend to find that with birds, if they get covered with oil, it's only about sort of 10% of them manage to survive. So again, you get volunteers who help cleaning up birds when you have terrible oil spills, etc. This was a bad one. This is the Exxon Valdez. When that went down, it devastated the coast of Alaska, and that was a pretty pristine part of Alaska where you had the glaciers coming into the ocean, and that just caused immense trouble. It took years to clean that up. There's the Exxon Valdez before it broke in two. I'm not quite sure of the story. I do remember back in the 60s, I grew up in Bristol, so my parents used to take my brother, myself, and sister to Brean Down and Weston-super-Mare. There was a tanker that got smashed up on the rocks near Cornwall called the Torrey Canyon, 1967, I think it was. I just remember right the way through the 60s, 67, 68, 69, into the 70s, you were always sitting on the beach, always getting covered in oil, because they just couldn't get to grips with the amount of oil that had come off the Torrey Canyon. It was certainly one of the great disasters that Britain experienced in terms of oil spills. So, Deepwater Horizon, this is probably the worst of the worst. BP, 2010, caused real political problems between ourselves and the Americans because it was BP, British Petroleum, BP owned, down there in the Gulf of Mexico. This thing went up. We had the Macondo well down below. I think it was 7,000 feet, very deep in the ocean. And it took the best part of 2.5 months to get it capped to stop that oil from coming up. Literally, I don't know how many millions and millions of gallons of oil came to the surface, but it caused an immense trouble for the fishermen in Louisiana and Mexico and places like that. What we've got to remember, of course, is that oil is the remnants of animals millions and millions of years ago, 300 to 400 million years ago, the tiny sort of like zooplankton that started to decompose. That's oil caught in the anticlinal traps. In the same way that coal is the remnants of the trees during the Carboniferous period, which came down and got crushed and layered. Those are our coal deposits. So oil and coal, of course, is totally, utterly natural. It's not man-made as such. It comes out of the ground, but it's the remnants of creatures that have gone before. So the Macondo well, how did they solve that? They sent down a submersible which managed to get on top of it and tap it, and stop the further leaks. So that was a disaster without a shadow of doubt. And that's a classic picture. I remember that being on the front of the Daily Telegraph, where it looks like British Petroleum have done in some of the firefighters in America, and there's someone's helmet there lying on the beach. But it did cause particular tensions, I do remember, between Obama at the time and David Cameron, who said, Obama, give us a break. Can you stop referring to BP as British Petroleum? Couldn't make it up. Anyway, oil spills, bad stuff. This is one of the largest cleanup vessels. You've got the Whale, the world's largest cleanup vessel. Don't really have much in terms of the number of facts there, but it's truly enormous, and it goes scooping it all up in a great big sort of boom. That's not the Whale, but that's a very similar sort of way of they pull the oil in, it floats on the surface. Oil cleanup, lots and lots of technology, increasing technology in terms of how they do that. My goodness, right, we jumped from oil to Fukushima, right? Remember this. This is obviously a nuclear disaster and can have a big and prime effect on our oceans. No two ways about it. We don't want to see too many of these because obviously what you get is there's the cooling parts of the nuclear power station got hit by that tsunami following an earthquake in March, and that's how the radiation spread. Nuclear radiation, terribly dangerous for all of us. Remember Chernobyl? I'll show you some pictures of Chernobyl. Again, that's the worst nuclear meltdown that we've ever had on the planet. Fukushima is pretty close, but I think it's just one lower down in terms of the rating system. So that's how the nuclear fallout headed right the way over to California and British Columbia and Canada, etc. Within days, it doesn't take very long for nuclear radiation to spread. Chernobyl, remember that one, 1986, seems like a long, long time ago now, but it was the worst disaster ever to befall the Russia back then, in fact the world. It was the worst nuclear accident. And it brought about the end of the Soviet Union because it effectively bankrupted them. They just couldn't cope with it. And towards the end, they just had to call for help from the West saying, look, we've got a major, major problem here. This is going to cause just numerous deaths. So, of course, these are the pictures of the meltdown of the reactor. And this will remain dangerous for the next 50,000 years or thereabouts until the half-life has subsided, etc. Nuclear radiation, very, very nasty stuff, and that's somewhere, a little village not far from Chernobyl. Of course, poor old Ukraine's got in lots and lots of trouble at the moment with the Russian sort of invasion, and I guess we've just got to hope that these power stations, Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia, don't get caught up in renewed fighting that not only cause trouble for the Ukrainians, but for the rest of us on a global basis as well. So everyone clubbed together to produce a great big sort of covering to cover that Chernobyl reactor. So we've got, talking about plastics now, plastics, the scourge of the ocean. There's something like 250 million tons of plastic floating freely in the ocean. And it's being added to all the time. It really is. I'll never forget, I was lucky enough to go on a trip to Komodo Island in Indonesia about 4 or 5 years ago, thereabouts. And Komodo Island sits there, bang, just to the north of Flores. It's just to the south of Sulawesi there. And we'd all had a great time. We'd seen these Komodo dragons, these lovely pristine beaches. And then as the ship got sort of 5-6 miles up from Komodo Island, all we saw for about 50 miles was this mass of plastic just floating in the ocean. When I say plastic, I'm talking about tabletops, computer laptop screens, I'm talking about sort of chairs, bits of plastic, telephones, you name it, fishing gear, and it went on for miles and miles and miles. And it was like miles and miles and miles across. And everyone on the boat, it was a Fred Olsen ship, by the way, and everyone was just there looking over at one side going, this is terrible. We're going to write to the Indonesian government. This is terrible. How can they do this to their waters? Well, unfortunately, these things happen where you have mass populations, you've got mass use of plastic, and plastic has only been around since the 1940s. Of course, these are the main places you get plastic accumulating. You've got these areas called gyres. And so the plastic tends to accumulate because these follow the patterns of the ocean movements. The ocean follows certain patterns because of the Coriolanus effect, which drives the ocean currents, and they accumulate. So we've got the biggest one is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, as they call it, and it's something like the size of Belgium, Holland, and parts of Germany put together. Now, plastic is not biodegradable, so it doesn't get broken down, although a bit of research suggests there are bacteria which will degrade plastic. But out there in the ocean, the main problem is it's photodegradable. So it's the power of the sun which breaks it down into smaller and smaller and smaller particles. And of course, as they get sort of bashed around with wave motion, you get some of these particles a couple of millimeters across. And many, many species, not only birds but fish, think they're eating eggs, think it's nutrients. So they're taking in all this plastic. And of course, they can't get it out of their systems. And it remains in their systems and again gets into that thing that we just discussed, the food chain. And the problem is you've got chemicals. So what have we got? We've got these PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. They're nasty. And they've been around since the 1920s. On top of that, as sort of fire retardants and accelerators and stuff that protects plastic, you've got polybrominated biphenyl esters, and they're particularly nasty. So you've got these two classes of nasty chemical contained within the plastic. And as the plastics break down into tiny little nodal forms, the chemicals become more and more prevalent. And they get into everything. Get into seabirds, get into fish, get into the larger fish, get into tuna, get into great whites, get into everything. Orca, minke whales, blue whales. And guess what? Gets into us as well. We're full of this stuff. Probably not dangerously, but we could be, and it could increase because More and more plastic is going into the ocean. As I said, 250 million tons of this stuff just floating around. Now, we have made some efforts to clear it up because plastic can be recycled. So there are certain projects and there are certain people out there who develop the technology to actually scoop the plastic in and take it away. But it is particularly nasty stuff. So I thought I'd just mention the plastic because, again, get that into the food chain and we've got a major problem. So there we have it. That's these sort of great patches of plastic. That's what it breaks down into. So that could have been the surface of, could have been a computer screen, could be a laptop covering, could have been a chair, table, whatever. But as it gets smaller, it looks like it's something good to eat. So fish look at that and think, yep, I'll try that, new form of egg. We're going to try some of those eggs. And of course, if they do that, they're in big, big trouble. So, what we're going to talk about next. We've covered plastics. This is about overfishing, and this is a prime example. There is certainly less fish in the ocean, as I think everyone will agree. Certainly everyone, people come up to me and say, Philip, why am I not seeing much out there? I've been looking out of the ocean for hours now. I haven't seen anything. There's nothing, only the odd dolphin occasionally. It's because there's just less fish and less creatures in the ocean. It's a fact that since the 1950s and 60s, we're probably, if you take the amount of life in the ocean, we might be 50 or 60% down. We are reducing substantially the amount of biomass in the ocean because of our pollution and our overfishing, etc. This is Atlantic cod, and the Canadians were fishing it for years and years and years. And you go to somewhere like St. John's in Newfoundland, and it's been sustaining local communities for over 500 years. And in the 1970s and 1980s, the Canadian government were warned. They were warned, so that's St. John's, beautiful place, very wealthy city, giant great trawler there in the foreground. Canadian government were warned by scientists saying, look, you're just catching too much of this stuff, catching too much cod out there. The ocean isn't sort of just, you're going to run out. And the Canadian government more or less ignored it because they were very happy with the amount of money that was coming in, the revenue was coming from taxes. So one day in 1992, the trawlers went out, and they had all this sophisticated stuff, giant sonars and the latest radars, and they could figure out where the fish were and what sort of great banks to go off and fish. And they came back with nothing. End of the day, nothing, not one fish. And overnight, it was almost overnight, the Canadian cod industry on the eastern coast capitulated, fell by 99.5%. It just collapsed. Collapse is the good word. You see the graph, it just suddenly goes next to nothing. So a lot of these guys just ended up going bankrupt. They had no fish to catch. Every time they went out, even if they went further and further, there was nothing to catch because we'd completely overfished this guy. And we'd taken a lot of the big fish, the older fish, and there were no more youngsters coming through. There were no more sort of cod being able to breed because we were getting them as well, getting the old ones and the young ones. So we'd almost eradicated the cod. And you can see from the graph just the way it just suddenly collapsed. The heydays of the 70s and 60s, millions of tons, down to practically nothing. There's a little blip there around 2000. That shows 10 years later, it hadn't, despite the fact they stopped fishing, there was a moratorium placed on fishing, it hadn't recovered. So we ended up with a situation whereby 10 years down the line, it was still, the evidence was there that we had caused a major, major problem, the collapse of the Atlantic cod stocks off the east coast of Newfoundland. So where is it now? It's something like 30% of what it was, say, in the 80s. So it's recovered, but like all these things, it takes a long time to recover once the damage has been done. So that's a prime example of overfishing, and it's happening all over the world. Bottom trawling, trawlers go out and they catch the bycatch. These are the creatures. We discussed the other day the blobfish, the ugliest creature on the planet. That is majorly threatened by overfishing, by bottom trawling, because it comes up and can't be sent back down again. Basically, it comes up to the top. That's the end of the blobfish. So lots and lots of stuff is just thrown away. And this is the capelin. What also happened with that example with Newfoundland is we hunted as a bycatch, which got thrown away, the capelin, which are useless. I mean, I suppose it's like sardine or something, but not much use in terms of the fishermen. So that got taken out of the food chain, and that was the stuff that the cod were feeding on. So it was an ecological disaster, and it's one of the prime sort of prime markers of what happens when humans overfish. Have we learned from it? Whaling, I'm not going to touch too much on whaling, but we banned that in 1986, so we started hunting the poor sperm whales and other whales back in the 18th century. And there we go, some pretty nasty pictures there, so let's just move on. Whaling was unpleasant. The whale, the automated sort of gun, the whale gun was developed by the Norwegians in 1868. So as soon as we got into this mechanized form of hunting, long gone were the guys in the boats who were going out with harpoons, but they could do it from the front of the deck. And when you have a range of about 60 or 70 yards and you can just take out a blue whale or a minke, you'll get him every time. So unfortunately, we got through this as human beings. It was a nasty phase. We went after the blue whale. We took its numbers down from pre-whaling, 275,000 of them on the planet, down to about 650 or thereabouts in the mid-60s. And there is a humpback whale. They were on the, basically the whalers would go after anything because they were after the blubber, and where they could get the oil, they would get the oil. But it was mainly the blubber with the big balines because they'd render that down. I put this down, 66 was when humanity woke up and said, bingo, do something now, do something absolutely now, or there won't be any more blue whales. And someone calculated that, okay, Revolver, that was the album 66. By the time you got to Let It Be, blue whale, gone, absolutely extinct, gone forever. And it seems that when you look back at the Beatles albums, it was a long, long time ago, and all those albums were very, very close. So there wasn't a great deal of time to make that decision in order to save the creatures. So RIP extinct, but it's not. So thank goodness. That slide doesn't really mean anything, but we don't have to reference the fact that blue whale is extinct because it is not. We managed to bring it back from the brink. And I've got some facts and figures there, but I'm not going to go into those too much. Well, the big one, global warming. Let's touch on this. Well, we've just had the COP29 conference. How are we doing for time? Okay. Looks a bit like Donald Trump's hair, doesn't it? Trump, he's back. Yeah, the man is back. So, global warming, the big one. What's it all about, basically? The basic science behind it. Carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, human activity, cars, power generation stations, everything to do with our lifestyle, everything. Carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere. It forms a blanket around the Earth and effectively stops the heat, the shortwave radiation which comes down from the sun, gets long wave as it comes off the ground, off the land, and it just can't get through this sort of blanket of carbon dioxide which we're putting up there. In fact, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is minuscule, really, if you compare it as a component of the gases. It's something in the region of sort of less than 1%. It's very small, but we're increasing it by a very small margin, which is having a major effect. Carbon dioxide up there, another gas which is causing big concern for humanity, and that is methane. And one of the big fears is that if the Earth heats up to an extent whereby the carbon dioxide is warming up the planet, then you'll get the methane release, and there's great big clumps of methane in these clathrates, these sort of ice rocks down in the Arctic, in some of the shallower seas, like the Sea of Azov and the Lebdev Sea and the Barents Sea in the northern part of Russia, and indeed around some of the shallower coasts around Devon Island, and the Arctic oceans are very, very shallow. In some places they're only about 70 or 80 feet deep. So more sunlight coming down, less ice cover, and you've got a problem because the oceans are heating up. So the big problem scientists fear is, in addition to the carbon dioxide, the methane getting dissolved and coming out and coming up through the ocean into the atmosphere. And that's what happened during a period called the Eocene, 55 million years ago, where the Earth just got hotter and hotter and hotter. And so one thing we don't want to do is get into a situation where the feedback of carbon dioxide leads to the release of the methane, which comes up, and the methane will be a disaster because it stays up there for a long, long time and is a massively greater, more potent gas than carbon dioxide in terms of allowing heat to escape. So you've got this sort of build-up, these feedback loops which just add to the difficulty. I could talk for hours about this, but I'm not going to because it's just, it's all over the place. But sea level rises, there we go. Obviously, with the ice sheets melting, you've got, if Antarctica were to go, that's going to add something like another sort of 6 feet to sea levels. And people have put these markers on the beach to suggest this is where the sea is going to be in a relatively few number of years. So, also another thing about global warming is it reignites a big problem that we had in the 1980s, which is the ozone layer. Because as the Earth is getting warmer and warmer, the stratosphere, so the lower part of the atmosphere, the troposphere, is getting warm. But because heat isn't getting through the troposphere, it tends to stay in the troposphere, the stratosphere is getting colder. And the colder the stratosphere gets, the more destruction is done to our ozone. So it's another one of those loops. We're messing with the heat of the Earth, and we've got this big problem called the ozone layer coming back here. And we thought we'd fix that in 1986 when we stopped spraying the CFCs into the atmosphere with our sort of hairsprays and things. But it's another looming problem that comes on the back of global warming. So, I said this was just an overview. There's one of the beautiful glaciers. That could be down in Chile or somewhere like that, Patagonian glaciers. Glaciers all over the world are retreating. So are the ice sheets. Lots and lots of water going into the ocean, warming it all up. And what happens when you lose the ice is you lose the albedo effect, whereby white obviously reflects light from outer space and bounces it back again. If you've got a dark surface like open ocean, what that does is it just absorbs the heat, and it's like 10 or 20 times the amount of heat that's absorbed by a white surface where it just gets reflected back again. So again, these feedback loops, all of them added together, adding to the concerns that we have. Ocean acidification, touched on that. So that's this is what enables the shells to make their calcium carbonate. The more carbon dioxide we put into it, the more difficult it is for the shells to hold on, so the little creatures, shellfish, etc., and the coccolithophores to hold on to their outer casings, which adds to a whole load of problems. I thought I'd just put that in. The coral reefs, under pressure, no doubt, and coral reefs have been with us since the Cambrian period, so 500 million years ago. Interesting enough, what is a coral reef? They're found all over the tropics, from about 32 lat in the south to about the same sort of thing in the north. I think the furthest south is Rottnest Island, Australia, and the furthest north is Bermuda, so about 30 on top of the north and south of the equator. They're basically, coral is, they're little polyps. They are little creatures related to jellyfish. So coral, and they breed during the time of the full moon. That's how they breed. They breed sexually and asexually. Very strange creatures. Only about sort of 3 or 4 millimeters in length, and they've got those tentacles that we looked at the other day with jellyfish that fire those nematocysts, those stinging cells, to capture their food. Of course, they do hunt fish and small creatures that come over the surface of the reef. But what they need, and they need this to the tune of about 70%, they need creatures that live within them, called zoanthae. And the zoanthae, what they do is they produce amino acids, and they do the photosynthesis inside the body of the coral. So it's this two-way relationship between the coral and the zoanthae, and the coral says, look, zoanthae, you don't want to live outside. Come and live in my intracellular sort of spaces, produce some amino acids for me and some sugars, and I'll be happy, and I'll give you somewhere that harbors you up. So it's a relationship. It's commensalism. They're both doing well out of the relationship. As the waters get warmer and more UV is coming down because there's less cloud cover these days, and the oceans are getting hotter, and the cloud cover is getting less and less, something happens inside, and the zoanthae tend to, with very, very strong sunlight, go into hyperactivity and start to produce lots and lots of oxygen. Some of the oxygen gets converted into hydrogen peroxide, and the corals there saying, whoa, this is just too much activity. And it dispels and chucks the zoanthae out back into the water. And it's at that point you go from those beautiful colors, the greens, the blues, and the oranges that you see on very healthy reefs, to the white stuff. And the white stuff is basically when it goes bone white, and that's because the coral has kicked out the zoanthae. So this crucial relationship, again, crucial biological relationships between creatures that help to sort of create a healthy environment. So healthy to very unhealthy, covered in slime. Florida Keys, lots of destruction down there. I guess that's even worse. So that's pretty bad coral. It doesn't look very colorful to me, to stuff that is getting worse and worse. Let's have a look at some other. Jamaica had a major problem. Again, this is overfishing, because one of the problems is there's certain species of fish on the reefs that clean them up, one of them being the parrotfish. So that's a beautiful reef, of course. We can see that, and we've got some lovely reds, and we've got some greens. And these colors are brought about because the zooanthulae, these tiny little creatures living inside the coral, they're components of chlorophyll. And it's the chlorophyll that converts the sun's energy into sugars. So that's what brings about the intense color on the reef. There's a leatherback turtle just floating around, having a good time. So we have some color, lots of color here. And we wish to preserve this. Let me see if I've got a picture of a pufferfish. Pufferfish are very important. Oh, sorry, it's a parrotfish, not a pufferfish. Pufferfish are the things that got that tetrodotoxin. Parrotfish. They were overfished in Jamaica to the extent that they just went. And of course, parrotfish, what they do is they chew the reef and they remove all the bacterial, so the slime that tends to cover the reef. So they clean the reef up and protect it from sort of basically infection. And of course, when we fished the parrotfish out of business, suddenly the reefs in Jamaica just started to die. And when they died, they just collapsed. And they're coming back again, but for about 20 years, there was no coral reef in Jamaica throughout the 80s and 90s, all because we'd overfished the parrotfish. A parrotfish, what it does is it chews the exoskeleton, which is the calcium carbonate, which is the stuff that the polyps, the coral actually lays down. It loves just chewing the rocks. You can hear them scratching away. They've got these sort of bone-like teeth, not teeth, but just sort of like bones that crunch away at the coral, cleaning it up. So very important in terms of understanding that a creature like that is very important for the health of a reef. There it is again. Just look at that sort of that mouth system. That's chewing rocks, basically. And at night, the parrotfish, what they do is they cover themselves in this sort of mucosal substance to protect themselves. Parrotfish. What have we got? Another parrotfish. Well, they're pretty, and we might as well have some nice pictures, yeah, in terms of things to look at. So there we are, parrotfish on a healthy reef somewhere. And that could be Bermuda, it could be wherever. That's the distribution of coral reefs. Just check the time, see how we're doing. Oh, almost there. Global distribution of coral reefs. As you can see, we've got the one further south, Rottnest Island, down the southern part of Australia, Western Australia, and the most northern coral reef we have up there in Bermuda. And we've got some beautiful reefs in the Caribbean. I'm sure that we can get out on boats in St. Lucia and Barbados and actually look at reefs. In fact, I know there are intact reefs there. So it's possible to see a lot of these beautiful places. The most intense area of reef, of course, is the Great Barrier Reef down that part of Australia. 1,500 miles in length. Covers a massive area about the size of Germany. And in terms of its width, it's about 100 miles across. Basically, just to the north of Brisbane upwards, to the very top, the Torres Straits, so about 1,500 miles. Most intense reef system on the planet is known as the Golden Triangle in the middle, which is near Sulawesi and places like that, where there are so many species of animals and fish. It's one of the most biodiverse areas on the planet. So again, it's very important that we preserve these reefs just so that we understand what sort of creatures exist, because we're learning from creatures and we're taking from the knowledge of these creatures, and we're extracting things like very, very useful medicines, not only from the ocean and certain creatures in the ocean, but also places like the Amazon, where we're analyzing the plants and the trees, and we're finding the components of what makes them tick. And we can use that to enhance our own lives as human beings by increasing our knowledge of medicine. So, global distribution of coral reefs. What we need to do is obviously do our very, very best to preserve these reefs and systems. Very complicated subject. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to me, just giving my views all over the place, I know. Been a great pleasure. I'm on again tomorrow at 1 o'clock for my last talk, and I promise you I'll show you some color. It'll be very intense, and we're going to talk about octopuses, cuttlefish, some of the creatures from the vents, some very, very strange creatures from 2 or 3 miles down. Look forward to it. See you tomorrow. you.